Hello, look at this wall. It is quite beautiful, with the fancy polygonal stonework projecting towards the sea. Maybe because the wall hasn't moved for millennia, we cannot tell if it is coming or going. However, that is an important question, and one that Cyclopean walls do not provide a simple answer to. See, most tendencies or ideas or technologies start somewhere and then are spread all around. But in the case of Cyclopean works, we cannot find an origin and trace a root. Even worse, sometimes they seem to have existed independently and then disappear after the contact is made, leading us to go to the sea in search for answers. The same sea this wall is pointing at. Today's wall is in Monte Circeo, midway between Rome and Naples, atop a bulbous mountain splitting the blue sky from the also blue sea. Officially, it is said to have been built as late as the 3rd century BC by the Romans in the mid-Republican phase, centuries after all the other polygonal walls around were made. Because, well, it's complicated, but I'll try. There are two Circeos, one atop a mountain overlooking the sea, great views, etc., and another one at the bottom, near the water, with proper amenities like a seaport. The village on the shore is as old as time. There is even a Neanderthal cave in there. Well, the cave is much older, but it was used by the Neanderthal people. Never mind the cave, we are focusing on the seaport. That was important for a long time, since it was used since the Bronze Age, and has some rough Cyclopean walls in sight. Fast forward to the Roman times and, in typical Roman style, they took over the site and built a lot of stuff, in typical Roman style, i.e. using concrete to glue the stones together and smashing to pieces any tribe that challenged them. Whilst all that up in the mountain, there was nothing but the views to speak of. No trade, no defense, no sense in building a wall just to gaze at the horizon. Not only because the place itself has difficult access, but also the quality of the stonework is too showy and not the type of stuff one would do for hiding. Thus, there's no way around it. This upper wall was built just to look nice, as proven by the fact that one can walk around it, defeating the purpose of a defensive wall. Maybe for the views, the Romans liked to hang out up there, leaving enough remnants of their presence to justify more than the usual confusion with the dating. Meaning, all over Europe, most Cyclopean constructions are said to have been built just weeks before the Romans settled, because that's when we first get notice of them, when the Romans wrote that whatever was there was already there. However, in the case of Upper Circeo, they didn't. The Romans were at odds with the Volci, the previous Italic tribe living in the area, who had kicked from this same spot the Latins, another Italic tribe for whom the Romans had a sweet spot. Thus, because the Romans never attributed the site to the Volsci, nor to the Latins beforehand, some academics have attributed to the Romans. Despite the lack of formal sources regarding the authorship of that wall, there is no scarcity of fictional ones. The nearby cities of very similar stonework, such as the impressive Alatri, were known as Saturnian, in reference to Saturn, the Roman name of the Greek god Kronos, who migrated here after being expelled by his son. Kronos was brother to the Cyclops, who were broadly considered the builders of the impressive walls in Mycenae or Tiryns, but also siblings with Oceanos, the grandfather of Circe. Monte Circeo got the name from the mythical witch Circe, who had her lair in this exact spot. Well, not quite so exactly, because these stories are all over the place. After escaping the Cyclops, Ulysses landed here. Then, seeing how Circe transformed his crew into pigs, decided to marry her or whatever, which is strange. But Circe was a complex lady, ranging from a rabid feminist to a witch, that I guess were similar things in those days, but also a goddess and even a princess, also somewhat equivalent. More sensible is the tale that Circe was coming from Caria in nowadays Turkey, a place with some awesome Cyclopean walls and famed for piracy, leading to a realization that beyond the Cyclopean walls, what unites all these stories is the seafaring. Nowadays we know it as the Mediterranean Sea, meaning the sea in the middle of the land, which is silly. What else would the sea be in the middle of? The sky? For that reason, I propose this body of water be from now on called the Cyclopean Sea. Because, yes, it's obvious. However, one person might see this video by mistake and be confused ahead of time. So let me fix it. Welcome, newbie. First of all, hit the bell and join the smartest audience ever assembled on YouTube. Secondly, you've been missing the build-up of this awesome theory. Whereas the Cyclopean walls, made with odd-shaped stones in the old world like Bronze Age Europe, are part of a lost culture, or better said, a family of cultures, who can be spotted by their unique style of construction. Starting with the Saturnian cities from Italy, named in reference to the fallen god Kronos, etc. These walls are characterized by large blocks with sharp angles and cover most of the Italian boot, plus one odd case here and there. Another case is the Pelasgian, inspired by the first inhabitants of the region, centered around Greece. It is notable for its fancier, sometimes elegant blocks and tighter fitting, with a tendency for complex geometry. Also around the sea, but the black one, we find the oldest, arguably, and more curvaceous style of construction, reaching nearly impossible levels of workmanship. Then the hill forts, Castellaras in France, Castellieris in Croatia, plus a bunch of others scattered in the whole region. These are the most primitive dry stone works, with barely any type of polygonal stones, although sharing enough other cultural traits with the families around to have them join the party. Lastly, the islanders, recognizable by their crude style with larger boulders often supported by smaller pebbles, in what was considered the original Cyclopean style everywhere, despite being more common in the islands of the Western Mediterranean, Western Cyclopean Sea. The Cyclopean builders were the first thalassocracy, a mouthful that can mean anything from the navy of an expansive colonial empire to just a bunch of pirates. This wavy power was once very popular, and many of the major ancient polities in the region fit the thalassothingy description. Minoans, Mycenaean, the Phoenicians, and to no smaller extent the Athenians and even the Romans all based their power on mastering the sea, in opposition to the land-based empires such as the Egyptians or the Hittite. To help understand how and why those sea powers were all the rage back then, we do have a good recent example. Europe in the 15th to the 17th centuries saw a quick succession of thalassocracies. Portugal, Spain, the Netherlands, England, on top of Venice and Genoa, all following suit, combining practical soft cushions on land with ruthless efficiency in the sea. Or better said, a surprising mix of trade plus piracy. The Cyclopean builders in the onset of the Bronze Age would be a bit like the Portuguese, much later on, in the Renaissance, in the sense that they would leave just the faintest trails, for not messing much with the local power structures, beyond mixing into them to create a bunch of Creole cultures. That's probably because they were the oldest or the innovators, the Portuguese for taking the thing to the Asian oceans, as the Cyclopean builders had done in the Cyclopean Sea. What we cannot tell is what came first. Was it the Cyclopean walls or the seafaring routes? Because although it makes sense that all the Cyclopean walls around the Mediterranean Sea had a single origin and were spread with trade over the sea, we do have documented in the 1500s the exact opposite case, when the Iberian maritime empires witnessed the collapse of independent polygonal walls. The Spanish conquistadors famously ended up the polygonal works in South America. Although the walls might be older than the Inca, what is a fact is that as soon as the Spanish arrived, the construction style was forever lost. What is less known is that at the same time the Portuguese arrived in Japan and traded in for an explosion in numbers and soon after the fast disappearance of the Cyclopean works in Japan. Even crazier, in South India, some mysterious polygonal works were attributed to the Vijayanagara Empire, which was crumbling also in the 1500s when the Portuguese arrived there and reported how the once buzzing cities settled with beautiful polygonal walls were being abandoned and left to ruin. Granted, these Asian and American styles of Cyclopean works are different and very distant from one another. Still, it is a mind boggling case of one idea being arguably independently developed in different and isolated sites to have it disappear as soon as contact is made. It is therefore possible that, back in the Cyclopean times in the Cyclopean Sea, things played out as apparently they did in the 1500s, with the walls first appearing independently and then forgotten as soon as contact was made. But I don't think so. Confused yet? Yeah, the situation is fluid, and there are no solid answers, but I'll try. The early Bronze Age was a period of fast innovation and deep changes and limited warfare, a golden age made of bronze floating around. The most visible part is the bronze itself, which is made with a combination of metals that does not exist in nature. So people had to cross the entire continent, or more precisely sail around it, to gather the ingredients for this material for the ages, establishing recurrent trade routes that would bring new and great wealth, but not yet overwhelming power. That's the thalassocracy phase, a sea power that does not force itself on land, having to negotiate, influencing the locals into embracing a prosperous trade network, plus creating a loosely related family of Creole cultures. As time moves on, by the end of the Bronze Age, the wealth accumulated by all that trade pays for proper empires, with monumental works and complex bureaucracies. Then the soft character of the thalassocracy is subdued by the iron fist of empires. This is visible in the stoneworks, with the emergence of more complex, elaborate structures, completed with an hierarchical society, whereas the original populations are forgotten to give rise to a new elite, often not even related to the previous inhabitants. Thus, for a brief period, the Cyclopean Sea was a web of related peoples, bringing new riches and sharing experiences from distant lands, including a preference for odd-shaped stones assembled in a puzzle. Then, as the wealth piled up, new powers emerged, subduing and often erasing the older identities. A time lapse that Circeo seems to represent, showing a departure from the original softer ways of the Bronze Age and the arrival of a harder punch in the Iron Age. Here's the thing. The Cyclopean walls around the Cyclopean Sea could be a bunch of independent coincidences that appeared spontaneously in many places and were abandoned after the increased trade and contact with new seafaring forces, as is the mainstream view. However, that seems unlikely, and I'd say it was as the myths suggest, with the ancient Cyclopean cultures spreading out with trade during a shiny period of discovery known as the Bronze Age, and only later be subdued and forgotten under the iron fist of new imperial powers. However, this common sense hypothesis implies a common origin and maybe a big event to wipe out all that was old. For example, the biggest flood ever written about, dropping us in our next destination. That's it for today. Hope you liked it. Drop an eye in the comments.